Before July, what every function needs to finish now. Q2 moved fast enough to leave things behind. Some of what got deferred can wait. Some of it can't. Here is a function-by-function accounting of what's still open and why the next 2 weeks are the right time to close it. The end of a quarter tends to create the illusion that the calendar is doing the work. Reviews happen, numbers get filed, and teams move on to the next planning cycle. But Q2 2026 left specific concrete items unresolved across EHS, facilities, procurement, and sustainability functions. And the arrival of July doesn't close them. It just makes them Q3's problem. This isn't just about operational hygiene. Each item below carries either a regulatory deadline, an enforcement risk, or a capital planning dependency that will become harder to address after the summer break than it would be to address right now. EHS, the OSHA HEAT program, updated and extended through 2031, with inspections already running. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, updated and extended its National Emphasis Program, NEP, on heat-related hazards on April 10, 2026. It took effect immediately and runs through 2031. This is not a continuation of the prior program. It is a revised directive that uses Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, and OSHA injury data from 2022 through 2025 to target 55 high-risk industries, including construction, manufacturing, warehousing, agriculture, and food processing. The updated program expanded the list of targeted industries and refreshed OSHA's inspection criteria. OSHA compliance officers are authorized to conduct proactive inspections on any day the National Weather Service issues a heat advisory, regardless of whether a complaint was filed. The federal heat standard itself remains unfinished, but that doesn't reduce exposure. OSHA has enforced heat requirements through the General Duty Clause of the Occupational Safety and Health OSH Act for years, and the updated NEP gives inspectors a formal evaluation checklist they apply when they arrive. The checklist asks for a written heat illness prevention plan, acclimatization procedures for new and returning workers, documented training, and evidence that water and rest breaks actually occur in practice. Paper programs that haven't been field tested against an actual heat event this season are the ones that fail that checklist. EHS teams with facilities in the 55 targeted industries that haven't reviewed their heat program since last summer are behind. The inspection can arrive the next time a heat advisory is issued, which in most of the country means any week between now and September. Facilities, PFAS compliance planning is in active rulemaking, and the comment window closes July 20. On May 18, 2026, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, proposed 2 rules that significantly reshape the per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances PFAS drinking water compliance picture. The first would extend the compliance deadline for perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFOS, maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, from 2029 to 2031 for systems that apply and qualify. The second would rescind the federal MCLs for 4 other PFAS compounds, PFHXS, PFNA, HFPODA, commonly known as Gen-X chemicals, and hazard index mixtures, which the EPA says were promulgated through a flawed process under the prior administration. The current public comment period is scheduled to close July 20th, 2026. A virtual public hearing is scheduled for July 7th. For organizations managing water infrastructure or operating in industries with PFAS exposure, this rulemaking matters in 2 directions. The compliance deadline extension applies specifically to public water systems that affirmatively apply and demonstrate implementation challenges. It does not automatically extend obligations for all facilities. The rescission of standards for 4 compounds doesn't eliminate liability, because multiple states maintain their own enforceable limits on some of those same compounds. Minnesota's PFAS reporting deadline for certain product categories falls on September 15, 2026. Connecticut and several other states have additional PFAS product and notification requirements taking effect through mid-2026 into early 2027. Organizations operating across jurisdictions need to know which state rules now carry the compliance weight. The federal standards no longer will. Procurement, supplier due diligence has formalized, and Q2 holding patterns left teams behind. Supply chain environmental accountability didn't ease in Q2. It formalized. Even with the scope reductions introduced by the European Union's Omnibus Simplification Package, the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD, retained its core requirement. Companies must demonstrate active due diligence across their supply chains, not just policy commitments. For procurement teams with significant European exposure, the question is increasingly less about whether due diligence expectations are coming and more about whether operational processes are being built to meet them. The practical problem for procurement entering July is that the direction of travel is clear even if the legal application timeline is not immediate. Under the amended CSDDD, member state transposition is due July 26, 2028, with legal application generally beginning July 26, 2029. But counterparties, major buyers, and institutional investors are increasingly asking about due diligence processes well ahead of formal legal deadlines. Teams that have not begun building documented supplier engagement processes, risk assessment procedures, and remediation protocols may find those conversations arriving sooner than the regulatory calendar suggests. The additional dimension is state-level PFAS product traceability. Several state laws require manufacturers and distributors to notify customers about PFAS in products or to phase out PFAS-containing product lines, with deadlines running through mid-2026 into early 2027. Procurement teams sourcing from suppliers in affected categories need to verify compliance status now, before those requirements become enforcement conversations. Sustainability. The compliance map shifted in Q2, and the reporting infrastructure needs to catch up. Sustainability teams entered Q2 expecting some degree of regulatory consolidation. What they got instead was further fragmentation. The SEC's climate disclosure rules stayed pending litigation. The agency ended its defense of those rules in March 2025 and proposed rescinding them on May 29, 2026. California's Senate bill, SB 253, requiring large companies to disclose greenhouse gas GHG emissions, is not stayed, and companies should continue preparing for compliance. SB 261, a related financial climate risk disclosure requirement, remains stayed by the Ninth Circuit while litigation continues. The UK's sustainability disclosure requirements continue to advance, adding another layer of jurisdiction-specific reporting expectations. The EU Omnibus package narrowed the scope of the CSRD significantly, reducing mandatory coverage by an estimated 85% to 90%. But the companies that remain in scope still face substantive reporting obligations. The compliance infrastructure question for sustainability teams heading into July is whether the reporting systems, data collection processes, and governance structures built for one regulatory scenario are the right ones for the scenario that actually exists. As A&O Shearman noted in a March 2026 Sustainability Outlook, companies should focus on mapping legal exposure across federal and state rules rather than waiting for a unified framework to emerge. That mapping work, if it hasn't happened yet, belongs in the next 2 weeks, not the next quarter. The sustainability function that arrives in Q3 without a clear picture of its actual reporting obligations by jurisdiction will spend the second half catching up rather than executing. Finance. Capital is available, but deployment assumptions need updating before Q3 begins. Finance teams face a parallel challenge that doesn't show up in a compliance checklist, but matters just as much for second-half execution. Capital remains available across most sectors, but permitting delays, interconnection queues, and longer project development timelines are changing when it actually deploys. Finance leaders should assess which Q3 and Q4 investments remain dependent on external approvals, interconnection decisions, or regulatory clearances, and which can move under conditions that already exist. The projects that can move are the ones worth prioritizing now. The ones waiting on approvals are worth flagging explicitly in the second-half plan, rather than leaving as assumptions. That distinction between capital that is genuinely deployable today and capital contingent on processes outside the organization's control is increasingly the difference between a second-half plan that executes and one that gets revised again in September. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.